Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, I found a very interesting rare book that was printed 24 years ago, and a very unusual book. And of course, it deals with a Dr. Ruth Drown, who I've made a few videos on, and it's difficult to get information. This shows that this edition was published in 2004. A memorandum of fundamental radionic principles as developed by Dr. Ruth B. Drown, compiled by R. MurrayDenning, and apparently his wife, Margaret Denning. Now, this is and I can't find, which is so weird, this is a German language edition, a very rare book. I'm not sure many of these were made. I'm not sure how many people care about Ruth Drown in general. But, of all the radionic practitioners, she seemed to have been the person who really did the most work and everything else. I was skeptical about her, and because you can't get any information out there of any credibility. And there's also the information that people don't understand why people may fail some tests, etc. We have to look at bigger pictures of what's going on in the entire scope of the medical mafia, the suppression of radionics, the discrediting of it with the usual people out there when it comes to any use of it for that matter. Radionics, of course, it has been thought. I don't know. I was always wondering if Ruth Drown was a con artist or not, but the bottom line is, pretty much unequivocally, is not true. This was a very serious woman who got very serious awards, who set up schools and everything else. This was a person who was dedicated to this particular type of consciousness technology. And she had her own very unique type of machines that was using conductivity through the body. And what has come down to your classical radionic instrument in the Ruth Drown fashion is the fact that, plain and simple, is too simplistic. So these 9-dialed machines that basically had nothing in them, which is what Ruth Drown was ultimately apparently selling, which she then took over to England, and George Delaware took over. She trained him. She set up everything over. This is a serious person. This isn't a con artist trying to steal money from people. She claimed to be able to do a lot of things, including stopping the bleeding in arteries. Whoa. This is pretty radical stuff. And was she psychotic enough, crazy enough? I mean, she had schools, she had places, particularly in Los Angeles, which I'm now kind of disappointed that I didn't go at least and see those buildings there when I lived in Los Angeles for over 30 years. To see what was going on there. And of course, all of this stuff has disappeared, and the radionic community, if you can call it that, is made up now, in particular, has been taken over by the lowest scum on the planet, your government agents, your Satanists, and psychopaths in general. And there really is no association anywhere in the world that is doing much of anything. The British group I find very strange. I'm not sure what they're doing. They don't seem to know much about anything. They don't resell stuff, etc. They have a pathetic library. They teach radionics where you have to go and live there for 3 years, making it near impossible for any serious person. And, having a radionic certificate doesn't really do anything for you. There's a semi-legitimacy in the UK, but this is shrouded in problematic legalese as well. And while there are some practitioners in England and are listed on the Radionic Association. It seems to be a very inactive group in general. They're sitting there. I'm sure they're a bunch of 80-year-olds, and they're really not interested in doing much of anything. Their technologies and everything else are confusing. They don't have any particular understanding of technology, and they're living in the past. Basically, they're copying instruments that Ruth Drown brought over and that De La Warr, who I believe started the Radionic Institute or some sort of organization out there, produced for many years. What's interesting is that De La Warr sent most of his equipment and writings to Christopher Hills, another Brit, a wealthy British man, who actually, in general, Ruth Drown is an amazing woman, and if I had to pick any radionic practitioner throughout history and speak with them, I would speak with her. We have information on Hieronymus, etc. I'm not sure what he did or not did. His connection to regular science and regular scientific organizations and industries, I always have a question about. Certainly Hieronymus, so the gossip is that his type of machines were very effective, but Ruth Drown, of course, really put together entire schools. She was out there pounding the drum of this technology as a chiropractor in Los Angeles for many, many years. And what ultimately resulted, and she certainly wasn't a fraud in any way direct. Now, how effective her treatments were, there are many people that say they were cured and their lives were saved by her. What percentage of this? What is all that about? Well, we just don't know. I hear that about everybody and everything, and there tends to be a very difficult way of proving anything and having any legitimacy to the particular garbage that is being sold in modern times. So Ruth Drown went over to England, trained De La Warr, etc. And as I was mentioning there, De La Warr donated all of his papers and lots of his tools to Christopher Hills, a fellow Brit who was very successful and wealthy in the United States. He had the College or University of Trees, I believe it was, in Colorado. He was the person who discovered or marketed spirulina. And brought that, whatever that means. I'm not a big fan of spirulina. It's all this stuff. That's the miracle. And of course, he died relatively young. I'm trying to remember here, and I don't have any information exactly. I think he died in his early or middle 70s. That's not doing too good. If you're a big health advocate, and what's interesting is all the diet people, everybody else, and all these people that pushed all these diets and so forth that we have even in modern times, that claim such great results, all died in their late 60s or middle 70s. And I'm talking about Pritikin, etc., all these people. So we just don't know when we get into all these things of what's actually going on with that. Now, Ruth Drown herself died, I believe, 73 or so. And it's a murky story of what happened. A lot of people think that she was arrested, and she was held on criminal charges, along with her daughter and an assistant. Now, just before trial, Ruth Drown, similar to what happened to, of course, Wilhelm Reich, died. She died a few days or so before going to trial. The trial went on, and her daughter and her assistant were convicted of the charges. I believe her daughter got 3 to 5 years in prison for what was going on. And I don't know if they had any pre-warning of this. Usually people are warned, don't do this and everything else. It's kind of a mess to go in there, and it's hard to research all this stuff. It takes hours and hours of time to find out what the legal cases are. Some of this is available to the public. You can find the legal cases. But the bottom line is that if she survived, and as I said, some people think she was injected in prison, And Wilhelm Reich may be the same thing. I mean, you got to remember, though, there's a lot of weird things going on, but it wouldn't surprise me a bit. Life is a lot worse than you think it is, boys and girls, kiddies, young'ums. You have no idea what's really going on. We can just see what happened with the Boeing Corporation, people. Boeing Corporation, one of the largest industries in the United States, one of the things America has been prized upon, which is building airplanes, was basically merged with McDonnell Douglas, apparently a really crappy company, and they cut corners and caused all sorts of dangerous things and took what was the pride of the United States and turned it into the sewer. And isn't that so typical? And what happened to two whistleblowers that came forward in the recent months? Both are dead, and they were both young. One was found thinking he committed suicide, found dead in his car. How convenient. And the major guy, again, these are people that are in their 30s, 40s, etc. He was found dead as well. I'm not sure if they're linking it to another heart attack. One was obviously a motivated, or I should say outside motivated and controlled suicide. They suicided him. So, you're talking about billions of dollars that are involved here. So, to think that whistleblowers would not be taken out, and particularly with the horrific shape of the criminal law enforcement that do nothing to protect the citizenship, what's to stop you? What's going to happen? Who's going to investigate this? What, Bozo Bob Dilligigeek from the local sheriff's department? And they're going to bring in what? Joe Dickshay face from the FBI? You're going to get nowhere, nothing. Nothing ever comes of this. Nothing has ever followed through. So basically, the people that do these kind of things always get away with it. So that brings us back to Ruth Drown and this very interesting book, which I'm going to get into here, which is extremely rare. Which I find very, very fascinating, which is not in English, written by an Englishman. Well, what? So the whole idea is that we have all these very strange things out there that we have to look into. So Ruth Drown is a fascinating person. I was unaware of most of it. Now, she supposedly was tested by a big university and failed horribly. As a matter of fact, she quit the test after 20 minutes and walked away from it because everything she did was wrong. Or was it? Let's open the little cracky door and really what's going on. So the point is that she was highly persecuted by the medical mafia. And I believe that she was told that you will fail, just like you're going to take a dive. Or you're going to take a dive permanently, which is a classical situation we see in movies and books where they tell the prize fighter that, you have to take a dive. Everything is bet on. And, this happens through all professional sports. They're all rigged as well. For you little youngs out there that don't think these things happen. Now, they're rigged in an interesting way, which I've talked about in other things. But, the bottom line with sports is what pays off the most is not who wins and loses, but the percentage of winning and losing, meaning the score. So the players can easily control that, and I've watched and seen this done in many games, and particularly games where people retire, where they make huge scores because they let them score. But they don't necessarily win the game. That's already been predetermined or left up to the players in some areas. But so I believe that Ruth Drown was told to. She was tested in such vulgar ways as she claimed she could stop bleeding of arteries and so forth. They took two dogs and cut their arteries, which is a horrendous thing to do, and they died because she couldn't stop it. Now, she must know whether she can do that or not. Why would you possibly do something as obnoxiously in your face of trying to stop bleeding, where it is not a case of being able to solve the situation? It's a case whether that person's artery, they die. Why would you possibly do something like that? Certainly Ruth Drown was not an idiot. And why would you do that? She was also tested in many other areas and apparently failed everything. The same thing happened with, of course, Albert Abrams' assistants and people that claim to have worked with him all were tested and failed, while Albert Abrams himself said he would be tested, but never went through with it, and again died in his late 60s. So before all of this persecution and so forth, apparently, and I'm not going to go through dates and everything, I don't think people really care, but Ruth Drown did go over to Britain to kind of bring that technology there. And I think people misunderstand, as with almost everything in this world, it springs up from the United States and then filters around the world. Movies, food, clothing, you name it, t-shirts, jeans, running shoes, all American, and it goes on and on and on. Nothing really comes from anywhere else, and certainly nothing fashionable or something that people find interesting. So generally, Americans will either invent it or they will take it to the next level, which has been done on so many things. So they'll take a very primitive product that comes from backward Europe or backward Asia, and they will then make it into a product that is much better and that people love and will consume. Whether it's a food or anything else, movies, records, everything else. Basically, nothing comes from anywhere except the United States. Name a foreign movie, name a foreign rock group, name foreign clothes or foreign foods. It's ridiculous. It's all American. That's the way it is. So, and I'm not a big fan of America in the bigger picture, but this is irrefutable facts. Nothing comes from the big mouth liars and people that want to say what peasants Americans are, particularly the Europeans, who have basically done and invented nothing. So the whole idea is that's what it comes down to. So Ruth Drown, here's another case of it. Certainly the Brits didn't do this. They didn't invent or even follow through with much of radionics. When it became outlawed in the United States, which means it was difficult to produce things, people stepped in and started making radionic equipment, like Bruce Copen. And, of course, Delaware was making them for years, and whomever else was big at that particular time. Of course, Copeland apparently sold lots of instruments. He was a good huckster, a good salesman, basically making instruments very complicated and looking very expensive, and he makes sure he followed that up with the price tag. So they were very expensive. Generally, Copeland units are pretty to look at, but the guts of them are just as comical as everyone else. And of course, Delaware himself was taken to court on several occasions. He got off one time by curing the judge's wife using his technology. He admitted that radionics was a psychic tool, nothing more. And there is nothing in a radionic instrument. There is no wiring to speak of. There are dials connected to potentiometers, connected to wires and a couple of plates. That's it. There's nothing in there that does anything. And even if you put electronics in there, it doesn't really mean that they're doing anything. This is not an electronic process as a major part of it. I use a lot of electronics to enhance the original process and to make it stronger, better, and more efficient. So he was let off in the other one. Then he was taken to court yet again, as everybody goes after people because there's no freedom anywhere in the world. And of course, that was done in Britain. So at the time these were going on in Britain in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, well, there was the persecution of everybody else. And there's been different practitioners doing different things in the United States. There was a revival of radionics pretty much in the 1990s and 2000s in the United States, where metaphysical radionics came out, which started to then spread away from the boring and fairly untested, quote, medical use of radionics, which what the British were doing. So, now, one of the major books on radionics out there that came out was by a man called R. MurrayDenning. Looky here. Oh, looky here. So this is the man who wrote a fantastic, apparently 2 books. I always thought he only wrote 1 book, My Search for Radionic Truth, which is a fantastic book and the one book everybody should read. And of course, all of those who are in our Radionic Scalar Institute have all access can read all the radionic books, and particularly my search for Radionic Truth, which has been out of print for many years. Here's a copy of it that, here's a picture of Ruth Drown that I have cut up here because I'm going to use this for something. So the whole idea is, now our MurrayDenning was a Britisher. He was an Englishman who took up radionics and wrote this book. Now, in terms of this In Search of Radionic Truth, he goes into Dimshaw's chromotherapy. He talks about dowsing. He talks about so many other things. So he doesn't cover just that extrasensory perception. Let's show you the little. And to his discredit, he goes into, and this is the problem with everything, he goes into stupid stuff as well, which is really sad that people get caught up in stuff and just start giving information on that nonsense. So this is a real problem that we have to be very careful with and not get caught up in that. The Peggotty board, biggest piece of crap you'll ever use. That's never done anything, and he talks about that. I guess it was popular when this book was published or in use in England, and this is what discredits everybody. It has lots of different, this is my Radionic Truth. It shows different machines. Very interesting. And of course, this is the other problem. Everything's a radionic machine and nothing's a radionic machine. Here is Ruth Drown Laboratories. Here's from her very complicated instruments. You can see this is not your simplistic 9-dial unit that a lot of people think of. We're much further past that. Here's a laboratory where they have many, many machines. And again, these are the kind of treasured pictures that you're not going to find much of. Here's another classic unit, an upright unit, which is kind of a nice design. And again, everything falls into this psychic spectrum, which is really sad because nobody's going past that. So it all becomes a great problem when everything works and nothing works. This is still perpetrated by the big boobs and idiots out there that are going to tell you that everything works, particularly coming from places like India and the mouthpieces that like to perpetrate the fraud that these people are doing, including prolific writers of this time who make illegal and criminal statements like Peter Renetti. So the whole idea, these are all the idiots that are writing books out there and trashing this, and I believe this is all part of a directed conspiracy. After all, Renetti is a government agent or has worked for them. Working for the Department of Defense. This person is at such a low level, it is shocking. But let's get back to this. So Ruth Drown is very, very interesting. And certainly, I don't think anything she did was in a malicious way. I believe she believed in what she did. And again, do we have any, she was in business for about 30 years. Well, if she's in business for 30 years, teaching it, selling instruments, there must be a success rate there. If something doesn't work, it tends to get around quickly. And people say, that is junk, and so forth. That was not the case. Now, what's interesting is that apparently Dennings here wrote 2 books. The only one that really got published, which is kind of interesting, which seems to have been only picked up by a very small American press, I believe back in the 80s or somewhere around that time. He originally published himself his My Search for Radionic Truth in England. And apparently back in the 80s or even previous to that, Borderland Science picked it up, and they republished a lot of different books and reprints at that time. They're pretty much of a worthless, defunct organization today. And from what we can see from Borderland Science and whoever's left in there, they are basically government mouthpiece and cannot be trusted at all. So that's my personal opinion. So you want to stay away from that junk. It's all a bunch of crappy reprints that they throw together and don't even try to do things right. It's a deliberately been destroyed organization. The previous people that were running that during the 80s are people of very questionable morality and contacts in general. So we have to be very, very careful with the kind of people that are out there and what they've done. And basically, these people have done nothing. That organization in particular had loads of very rare books that have all disappeared. And of course, they were never able to properly publish anything because it's a big business. I did that for years and made a lot of money republishing out of print books or out of rare books that couldn't be gotten anymore. The authors were dead. Nobody printed them. And that was a good market to save information. And of course, that became a problem with the powers to be that then harassed me. So, and put me out of business, the criminals that we run into. But as I said, this is very interesting, this book. Basically a memorandum of functional radionic principles as developed by Ruth Drown, compiled by him and his wife, which is quite interesting. Now, this book was never published in English that I can find out. Apparently, this particular press published this 20 years ago. It is a German press, apparently ran by Radionic Verlages Press by Claudio Romanetti, who has many different books and apparently is running some sort of press today. But, there's basically very little to no interest in radionics in Europe, and very little, if anything, in Germany is going on. It's all defunct organization with old books that have it. But apparently, I don't know, I'm assuming he translated this book, Denning's book, into German, and it never got put into English, which is really a crime to do that. And it's interesting that that we have these kind of symbols here. Is this a Kabbalah symbol? I don't know. It almost looks like the Kabbalah there as well. How that fits in, I have no idea. But this is talking about Ruth Drown's beliefs and what radionics was to her, which is quite fascinating. And what you do see here, which makes it even, and I'm slowly translating this, and someday, here's a couple of pictures of Ruth Drown. There's the classic one everybody knows. Here's another one I haven't seen before. Certainly a very unattractive woman. But she did have a daughter. I believe she worked in the defense industry during World War II. Some people have said that she was the secretary to Albert Abrams. I find that hard to believe, but it could be. Now, here we have Ruth Drown accepting a major award from, and I think it states this in the other book, that she actually got an award. If you want to think that this wasn't a person who science valued, or that who didn't have a credible background, well, it doesn't seem to be the truth. None of it seems to be the truth. She was valued and was given awards by top scientific organizations. Let's see if I can find that on here. And here's one of the awards she got. And here's a better picture. Of course, this book, of course, is your typical low-quality German shit you get. On December 10th, at the luncheon in the Rainbow Room atop the RCA building, a certificate of merit was awarded to Dr. Ruth B. Brown by the New York Museum of Science and Industry, which is a top organization, particularly back then, a part of the Rockefeller Foundation. The award was made for her hemorrhage control and diagnostic instruments, and reads as follows, just saying what was on the actual certificate. So she was able to prove to a scientific committee that she could stop hemorrhagizations. Now, this means that when you cut arteries, what she said that she could stop the bleeding was apparently true, and that she had diagnostic instruments, radionic instruments, that apparently were effective. And I'm trying to remember, it doesn't really say what year here. And what is interesting here is it says the award crowns 29 years of research and 18 years of practical use. So, and this was awarded to her in 1946. Very fascinating. So she was very active in this field for a long time, and that would fall into the time where she could have actually been the secretary for Albert Abrams, the very wealthy San Francisco doctor who kind of started all this in a kind of a sideways way of doing things, because it's not really radionic instruments as we know them today. So very, very interesting. So again, here's, if this person was a complete and total fraud, we would have had very different information on her. She wouldn't have been getting certificates from top museums, Rockefeller Foundation, connected people, etc. And let's go into a lot of other things, and this has some very rare photographs in it. Here's that one I just showed you. And here's her other people that worked at the Drown College. She had her own college of radionics. Very interesting. And here's some people I've never, ever heard of. Here's Cynthia Drown. That was her daughter, Chatfield. And here was the people that worked in her institute. And her secretary, I believe, as I said, was convicted of criminal charges. Her daughter was put in prison for 2 to 3 years. And of course, as I mentioned, she died before getting there. Here's some other people connected to it. Again, I've never heard of these people. You don't get much information on Drown and who was involved with her. But apparently Baldwin Bishop, a Ward Grady, and a Claudia Cross, or Klaus Cross. Interesting. These are all the people that were working at the college, and apparently in Pasadena, California, at the Drown College, and it even has the address here, 1521 North Garner Street, where she had offices in Hollywood, California. And that's a street I've been by, but never, ever stopped many times. So all of these people are involved in it, and you just don't get this anywhere else. So, I have all of Ruth Drown's books, which I'm going to have to reread. I really don't remember any of it. It's been so long. But she wrote her theory and practice on things as well. But I don't believe that any of this information is in the English edition, which I'm going to have to dig up. There are certain rates in here and everything else that you could possibly use. Here's another person who was involved in the organization from England, Mary Lage, apparently in 1947. They talk about her radio vision and all these things. Now, all of these machines and stuff, now there is a place that has these, I believe in Minnesota, that has antique electronics in it. That's ran by a major electronic manufacturer that makes pain pumps and other things, and you can actually go see there. I can't remember the name of it right now, but they apparently have it. I was in communication with them in the past, but you can't really figure out what's in particularly Albert Abrams' units because he filled his units with gunk. Now, here's a picture of the Ruth Drown College and laboratory. And here's the street address off in Hollywood. So we'll conclude part 1 here, and I will pick up with part 2.